going on, Husker fans? Coming to you on a Friday in March. It is the Pick Six podcast with Sam McKewon, Jimmy Watkins. I'm Evan Bland, and the sun is out. Nebraska football is halfway through spring practices. It's been a newsy week. Basketball season in these parts, outside of Creighton women, is all done. And there's a lot going on. How are you, gents? Meeting on a Friday, first of all, I think we have more of a relaxed feel here than we would on our normal Tuesday, Wednesday recordings. How are you guys?
I just flexed my wrist and it cracked. I'm 26 years old. That's concerning to me.
It's all downhill from here.
It is. Sam, how are you?
Okay. It's been a busy and full week. There's been a lot going on. So a lot of movement in Nebraska's basketball programs, which we'll get to. And then, big news in the football program, sort of. I don't know if the final story is done, but, I don't know if we're all the way at the end of that story with Zavier Betts or not. But just a full week. Like, it feels like nothing really slows down very much around the program. And then, there's an absence of winning. We're not going to talk about Creighton on here. I went to the NCAA tournament last weekend for the women's team and watched them win a couple of games over Colorado and Iowa. And the Sunday game was thrilling. It was great. But it reminded me of, the absence of winning within Nebraska's major programs. As I think I was filing the story on beating Iowa, you were filing your story on the 21-4 loss to Texas A&M Corpus Christi.
Yeah.
And that was a crispy beatdown.
Come on. That was just... That might be the biggest WTF result of the entire sports season. Right up there with losing to Western Illinois in basketball. They're just seriously? Why? That kind of thing. And so, they're doing well in some of their sports. They're doing really well. The Nebraska wrestling team was really good. Other things are going on that's good. But, I was struck by that. So it's somewhere in there, Nebraska's got to start winning more with its top men's teams, and they've really struggled to do that.
Well, we're going to get into some broader football questions, speaking about winning and trying to turn things around. But let's start with the big news of the week, which Scott Frost dropped on his Thursday availability, saying that Zavier Betts, who was heading into his third year at Nebraska, was set to be the second leading receiver on the team out of Bellevue West, headliner of the 2020 class, is currently not with the team. And that's all the detail he wanted to get into. Didn't want to speculate on whether he may be a part of the team in the future, why he's no longer part of the team. Sam, I know you spoke with Zavier a bit and
off the record,
had some good reporting. Well, you included some of that in the reporting. Yeah. I guess maybe your impressions, first of all, on the news itself, and then how that affects this wide receiver room, which obviously is undergoing a lot of changes with a new position coach and a number of transfers too.
Yeah, I think that we can talk about the zoom out perspective a little bit here for a second. Nebraska's pretty consistently struggled to keep wide receivers in the program. Some of those reasons have virtually nothing to do with Nebraska, and to be very honest with you, in this particular circumstance with Betts, who I think is, maybe the most talented receiver they've had in some time, maybe since Quincy Enunwa, maybe since Maurice Purify. It doesn't have much to do with Nebraska. I think it has more to do with where Betts is at as a person. I think people who have known him for a long time would tell you that there was, even in high school, as gifted as he was, there could be at times an ambivalence to the sport. He was rounding into his junior year, that second semester, which is when you do a lot of your recruiting, and he went out for baseball. That's just kind of who Zavier is. And so, there were moments in there he had to scramble to get his grades, and I don't know that I would describe it that Zavier's a smart guy. You talk to Zavier, and it's pretty clear that he's a pretty sharp guy. And so, we'll see. He was going to meet with them today. He said he didn't know where his answer was going to be. I think kind of believed that. I'd be surprised if he were back this spring. I'm not sure that the book is going to be opened or closed either way. But he hasn't practiced with the team since spring break. I think there was some thought process as to whether he would practice at all in the spring, but then he did practice the first couple of weeks, and then he hasn't practiced since spring break. And here we go. I think within the program, there's a challenge right now to make sure that a lot of these guys are getting new coaches. For the receivers, they're going through what the Nebraska DBs went through when Travis Fisher got there. Travis Fisher was like the fourth coach in 4 years for those DBs. These receivers are going on their third coach in 4 years, the guys that have been around. That's a lot. And Mickey Joseph is different from Troy Walters and Matt Lubick. I would say he's good in a different way. He's most similar to Keith Williams, who was Walters' predecessor. And so I think Joseph's going to push them in a certain way. He's going to talk to them a certain way. I think he feels like there are things that need to get better right away. I would agree with that. And so, I think long-term, Joseph has a better chance of retaining some of the guys that might have fallen off than maybe some of his predecessors. But I think it was probably a shock to deal with a coach who is that aggressive and thought-provoking in the way that he coaches people. And so Nebraska, sooner or later, has to get to a point of equilibrium with that room where you have a reasonable expectation that, for example, there's 3 redshirt freshmen there right now, Hardy, Neville, and Grimes, that they're going to stay there for 4 years and they're going to get better as players, and that it's not going to turn into they were there for 1 or 2 years and then they left and they never played, because we've seen that cycle seriously now for the last 6 years.
Yep.
Stanley Morgan is that one consistent piece. J.D. Spielman kind of was, but you can go all the way back, Evan, to Darion Grimm, and you can go from there. There's so many different guys that have cycled through the program who just didn't stick. Darian Chase was here in 2019, left the program, and is now going to be a really good player. Is a really good player at Portland State.
Yep.
Javon McQuitty didn't stick around. Keyshawn Johnson quit the sport.
Demarion Houston. Yeah.
Demarion Houston. Jamie Nance.
Yep.
Who's having a nice little career is McGriff at Utah State. Justin McGriff, who was the 6'6", 210 adjuster. They've lost so many players. And sooner or later, that attrition really catches up to you. And I think Betts is a different story than literally all of those, but it still hurts you because that's a guy, when he's right, can go beat an Oklahoma corner for a 55-yard play. And so that's the challenge at the moment, Evan, is they've got to try to figure out how to manage that position better. And I think Joseph has a good handle on that. On the flip side, I think the good news is that the running back room is stabilized. That's not only based on what I hear coming from these guys, but things that I've heard from people who are around it. There's a good feeling around that room right now. That Jock Yant came into camp healthy and in shape. That Anthony Grant is the real deal and isn't showing up in the summer like Dedrick Mills. And that Ramir Johnson, although you cannot play him 60 snaps a game, is nevertheless a guy who you can use in that context and can be effective. You can give him 15 touches a game, and that's effective. So there's positives there, but the frustration around not only the receivers but the injured tight ends is just one of those question marks. It's probably going to linger through the rest of spring.
Combine that with we're going to have a new starting quarterback here. We've got a brand new offensive coaching staff, and the clock's ticking. This is a 1-year evaluation period. I would not call it an ideal start to spring camp. I would not call it an ideal start to the sand timer that we just tipped over by hiring all these new coaches and restructuring contracts, right? As far as it pertains to the Betts thing, I think back to 2 weeks ago when we were all sitting around the tables on the first day of spring football availability, and Mickey Joseph was talking about how he was singing Zavier's praises. He was talking about how he had matured and how much progress he's made since he's gotten there. But hearing the way Sam just framed Zavier's background and the ambivalence, I also remember there was like 4 or 5 questions. It was a weird thing at the beginning where Mickey said one of his Mickey-isms is like, you're either going to like football or you're going to love it here. And we're going to find out which one it is. And the guys who love it, those are the guys who are going to play for me.
Yeah.
Well, you hear those words now. You hear what Sam just said. I mean, you can kind of connect the dots on what might have happened here. On the field, not only can Zavier Betts beat a corner one-on-one for a 50-yard play, everyone on the defense knows that, right? Like people's eyes are following him wherever he goes. If Zavier Betts comes across on a jet motion, people pay attention to that. If Zavier Betts runs a straight line, even if he's not going to get the ball, safeties are paying attention to him. That's a quality that is hard to replace. I think there's plenty of scholarship guys in that room that can replace the production maybe that we were expecting from Zavier Betts. I don't know that there's a ton of guys in that room that can replace that aspect of it. So big loss if he's gone for good.
That's a good point to make. I think Trey Palmer is the question mark there. I think if Trey has the speed and he can take things over the top, I think they're putting Omar Manning in spots. And I thought Manning was pretty expansive. I know there were some concerns about Manning in the slot and did he like that and so on and so forth. But I think Manning is somebody who can occasionally take a defense over the top. But I think your over-the-top guys, if Betts isn't there, is probably Trey Palmer and it's probably Oliver Martin. Those are your two guys that are going to take the tops off of the defense. We saw Martin win in the slot on that slot go against Illinois, where he got behind the defense and Adrian kind of underthrew it, but Martin was there. I think he's the other guy. And so you've got to those are probably your take the top off guys. And then they've got a lot of guys that can operate underneath. They really do.
You mentioned Manning. He's a guy who could have fallen into the category of all the guys that you mentioned, but he's been really outspoken in terms of mental health, and he worked through a number of things, and so it's kind of cool to see him come out the other side. The other thing about Betts that I just wanted to mention quickly is I think it'll take people a little time to kind of grasp if and when kind of his story comes out why he's no longer part of the team. Just because, for one, his narrative to this point has been athletically gifted, maybe hasn't had a great handle on the playbook, and hasn't been somebody who's been on the field late because the coaches don't trust him to be where he wants to be.
Yeah.
And you combine that with this era of the transfer portal where, hey, this guy's not on the team anymore. What do you assume? You assume you're going to see that dude's name in the portal pretty quickly, and he's going to find greener pastures somewhere else. And so it seems likely that neither of those is the fate for Zavier Betts. And so I think that's notable in how different it is from sort of the climate of college football.
Real quick, because you mentioned Oliver Martin as a take the lid off the top, whatever you said there. Guy, remember last year after the Illinois game, like a 6-7 day span, we thought Oliver Martin was going to be the number one target. I think that just kind of speaks to the grander metaphor that we're talking here about the wide receiver room. Just like everyone's out here in the wilderness, like Oliver
hurt.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But he came back, and then it just wasn't the same.
Yeah, I think there was some. Why isn't he coming back? Will he play if he's not 100%?
But this fits the entire theme. It's the same deal.
Mm-hmm.
I here's what I would say, and this Tom Chattel is going to have a nice column, I think, on Sunday about Frost and his old staff versus his new staff, and Mark Whipple, and so people want to read that because I think it's going to be really interesting. Here's what I would say, Jimmy. I am not sure that last season, even with all the assistants that he had, that Scott ever really took a whole bunch of steps back and said, you figure it out. I think there was still within that wide receiver room a kind of micromanage is the wrong word, but just like, a word. And that a head coach should have a word. But I think Mickey Joseph's very, very different than Lubick in the sense that I think it's Mickey Joseph he coaches in a way that is so, I think, different enough from Frost that Frost is going to take a step back and say, you're going to have to do it the way you do it. I think the same thing is true of Brian Applewhite. I think what's interesting is that I think Frost's initial staff was similar to him in the sense of their philosophy of coaching and somewhat of the, the Osborne-esque, put the arm around a guy. And honestly, some of these coaches I would not Applewhite and Joseph are going to be tough on their players. And they execute a kind of tough love that you might see on the defense that I think Travis Fisher has for his guys.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a changed room. I think offensive line is probably that one exception where Donovan Rail this is the first time he's doing it, and it would be unfair, I think, if you didn't, see how he was doing with it and working through it. He's got a hard job, and he's having to rotate a bunch of different guys all over the place, and that's a real question mark. And I've said this a couple times. You really can't. The person who hired Raiola is the person who, to some degree, is responsible for how that room turns out, at least in year one. Because Raiola is doing this for the first time, and you cannot expect him to be a 30-year veteran. So Frost is going to have to manage that one a little bit, as is Whipple. that's the one where maybe you look at the other guys. But with Joseph and Applewhite and Becton, you look at their spots and you're like, they need to figure it out. They've been in this long enough. They know how to do it. So I think Frost has taken a half step back, and in doing that, I think the players are probably a little bit, they're not getting as many mixed messages. I think they're getting clearer messages from their position guys.
What do you guys think? I mean, you talk about all these changes, new coaches, we're hearing from new players. Nebraska's halfway through spring ball, 8 practices in. They're going to have their 9th on Saturday. What's the vibe that you guys get from spring, just from talking with some of the new coaches, from the players, just in general? I mean, how, if you were to put a word or two to sort of the vibe that you've gotten from the team this spring, what would it be?
I would say uncertainty, because basically at every position group we're talking about either there's a Zavier Betts situation, or more often people are hurt. The tight end room, everybody's hurt. Offensive line, the 2 presumed starting tackles are hurt. So everything the way I'm approaching all of these press conferences, everything that is being said, it's spring is the time where hope springs eternal, right? It's like draft night. Everything is optimistic. There's so much potential here. Even the bad things, well, those are just learning opportunities. That's what spring is about. But I take everything that I'm hearing with a grain of salt, because it's not gut checking time yet, and we don't have all the pieces here yet. So I think that players are trying to put on a brave face, coaches are trying to put on a brave face, and there are genuinely some good things happening here. Like Jaquez Yant being in good shape, that's huge. I think he was, I said this before, he was the most impressive runner that I saw on the roster last year. And if he's able to deliver with more consistency, that's a game changer for a running back room that desperately needs someone to come up and grab the job. But I'm just kind of throwing my hands up. It's an incomplete grade at this point, and it's going to be no matter what in the spring, but I think even more so that's the case here. And as I said at the top, I don't think that's a great thing for when you're working in all these different pieces, new faces at key positions, new offensive staff, and you have a 1-year evaluation table. So it's an incomplete, but it's an incomplete that you don't want to be an incomplete.
Imagine writing a story that may be one of the biggest stories of your career, or whatever that is, and interviewing however many people you would interview. And, you work on it for, 3-4 weeks, and then you just stop for 10 days. And then you start again. I would think that the first 3 to 5 days after starting again would be like being in a fog. Like you wouldn't necessarily want to do it. You might be like looking through the fridge for an extra piece of cake. You might take a walk.
Oh yeah, I'm a big pacer.
You might scroll through your Twitter. I think that's probably what this week was a little bit. I'm not saying that they weren't locked in, but I'm saying it's very hard to work really hard at something for a couple of weeks, then have the scrimmage that they had right before break, which was a little tumultuous, and then go on a vacation, a spring break of like 8-9 days, then come back. The first day is pro day, which is Tuesday, and everybody, all the old guys are coming back. You got one eye on your assignment, and you got one eye on, oh, look at that, it's JoJo, and so you're wanting to say hello to everybody and meet all the NFL scouts, and so that's normal and human because the scouts are often there to watch practice too, and so there's probably a little bit there, and so the vibe that I got on Thursday is, we only got 8 of these left. We need to hurry up. Like, that's the vibe that I got from Frost. Like, there's just not enough time to do all the things that you want to do. And so I think there's a lot to go. The key is put in the volume, then pare it down. The paring down is so crucial because you have to come up with a package. And, of course, the package is like 90 plays. There's tons of plays. But you have to come up with, this is what our identity is going to be. We're going to live with that identity, and we're going to trust that our schedule is amenable enough and we're good enough at executing that we're going to remain in that identity for as long as we need to for the first half of the season. Then if you got to make tweaks in the bye week after you play Indiana, then you tweak it. But you have to trust that your template and what you want to do on offense, and more importantly, the quarterback who's going to be doing it, is good enough that you can squeeze out 4 or 5 wins. And that I don't think that's ever easy. I think as human beings we always want We always want to double and triple check our work, and I think that's the key, is that there's tension there. The top one of the most talented receivers in recent history is probably gone for now. A bunch of tight ends are banged up. Your 2 top offensive linemen are out of camp. They're banged up. Your quarterback's new. Your running backs, I think, are going pretty well. Your offensive line coach is new, and he's mixing and matching all over the place. It's just not ideal. Like I think it feels like a lot, and I can resonate a little bit with that over the last 9 months for me, which is like taking on a new role and doing some other things. So I get it. I think it's just going to take time for them, and then it's that paring down process of like picking a lane, Days of Thunder. Pick a lane, drive through it. They're going to have to pick that. And Frost has struggled to pick that lane over the first 4 years of his career. Like, you've got to pick it and go, and you can't just pick a play. You've got to be able to pick an identity, and if they pick that, then I think they'll be okay.
Yeah, my word was disjointed. I mean, it feels evident that a lot of the staff is coming together from different places. Like, when you hear Mickey Joseph talk versus Donovan Raiola talk versus Bill Bush versus Mark Whipple, like, these guys have, and it can be a positive eventually, all the different experiences and ideas.
I mean,
that
like,
they
not
bring.
all of these guys have to be working. They don't have to. You can work in lockstep without, taking different routes, right?
Sure. It feels like it still feels sort of mishmashy. Like, they haven't been around each other enough to sort of have the same, mantras and talk the same way. Like that, and that's something that Frost's old staff absolutely did. Obviously, from their time at UCF, they just spoke the same way. And so I think kind of bringing that message together is part of it. I'm kind of with you, Jimmy, though, too. Like, it feels like a lot of spring has been, in the past, has been about, okay, it's time for optimism, first of all, time to drink the Kool-Aid, and it's time to sort of learn what the strengths of the team will be for the upcoming fall. And I don't feel like either of those things characterize this spring, partly because of the injuries that Sam outlined. Like, we're going to get through spring and have no idea really what the offensive line is going to look like. Tight end is decimated now. Their top 4 players are out for who knows how long in some instances. You're talking about like in the secondary where you're replacing 3 starters and you have kind of an idea, but you don't really know. And I don't know, the further we go along too, the more I look at the defensive line specifically, and I'm just like, to me that's a big red flag on that team.
Get resolved in the spring.
I mean,
I think they're running the ball in
portal.
practice, and they're running the ball at Nebraska, right at them.
Sure. But do you feel good about the offensive line, or do you feel badly about what's going on defensively?
I think the offensive line will be all right. I think defensively that's a concern. And I know Reimer's not in there. I mean, they've got a lot of guys banged up, and no. I mean, I think it's a concern. And it can't be resolved, I think, in the spring, because I think you have to add bodies to it.
You're going to have to, yeah.
They're probably going to have to go in the portal and find some guys. I don't know who the hell they're going to find right at this moment. I think you wait until after spring and see what you get, and then maybe you take a flyer on a JUCO guy. And what's interesting is the one guy that they decided they didn't want turned out to be pretty good. Tony Fair.
Sure, yeah.
Went to UAB, and then he went to Auburn, and they kind of cut him loose.
I mean, you look at the line, and it's Ty Robinson, it's Casey Rogers, who has been hurt or something. He hasn't been around.
Hurt his ankle against Iowa.
Hurt his ankle.
Ongoing.
Yeah. And you assume that Nash Hutmaker is going to make that jump, and some of the younger guys can step in. But man, you talk about stopping the run in the Big Ten, and I know everyone, there's talk about, okay, it's a 3-4, and so your outside linebackers are essentially on the line, and I get that, but like you're going to need those big bodies to stop the run. And if you're counting on the portal in May and June and July to fix that, to me, that has been an ongoing area where it's just like, and there's a new position coach, obviously, with Mike Dawson back there too. It's something, I don't know if we're going to learn much about it this spring, but that's an area of concern.
The Big Ten does not run the ball to your 3-4 outside linebackers. They run the ball straight at your nose.
Sure they do. Yeah, I mean, they can.
They can, but
sure.
the identity of the Big Ten, especially if they know that's a weak spot for you, it's coming at you. It's coming downhill.
Yeah, I mean, yes.
It's a downhill run game conference.
Well, running at a 7 technique is still running.
I guess what I mean
you're
is
in the tackle box.
Nebraska's
but I get what you're saying.
They've rotated 6 guys on the D-line for most of Frost's time here. Can you name 6 guys on that roster right now you feel good about rotating? I can't.
No,
Half
you
that.
can't. But what I would say is this, and we don't need to go off into a rabbit hole here. I think Eric Chenander's scheme can functionally do some good things in the run game so long as you've got a nickel, like who can come up and run support. They didn't have that against Wisconsin and against Iowa because Luke Gifford was new to that and JoJo got hurt, and so that was part of the issue. I think they've got a scheme that can slow a run game down, and the way they do that is they get the two outside guys, and they can either be, they're not true ends, and they're almost like nines, and they set the edge, and it brings everything back inside, and anyway, it doesn't matter. They've got a scheme that I think can limit that. The challenge is when you've got an offense that wants to run power and wants to run power toss and wants to be able to pin your outside linebackers in and then get a tight end coming around that gets to your safety, and it's an alleyway to the end zone. And there's teams that can do that in the Big Ten. Illinois can do it, for goodness sakes. And so they're going to have to find a way to get interior pressure, which I think they can manufacture. And I think they've got guys who, if what you're asking them to do is get down in a 3 or 4 point stance and be a bull, I think they can be a bull. The problem is, what do you do with the pass rush when you've got to keep those guys on the field and it's first down and you can't generate anything with 4? You got to bring 5 and 6, and all of a sudden you're weakening your coverage.
Right.
The 3-4, the scheme that they run is inherently more difficult to rush the passer with. It just is. Anytime you're coming from depth and people can see where you're coming from, it's harder. So they've got to find a way to scheme a pass rush, A, and B, I think they can find a way to scheme that run against the run, although not to the level that they did this year. And they weren't as good of a run defense as I thought they were going to be. I thought they were just okay. But I think they'll be decent, not great. The question becomes, okay, 1st and 10, you can throw the ball over, you're asking a lot of those young safeties. Deshaun Singleton may be one hell of a player. He hasn't watched Big Ten offenses. He hasn't seen it. Tommy Hill hasn't seen it. It's a challenge for those guys to know how to manipulate Big Ten offenses that are really good at kicking safeties' butts. Because even though Nebraska had good safeties last year, Big Ten teams were able to manipulate Miles Farmer and Deontay Williams and Markel Dismuke at times.
Yeah. If you guys could watch an entire spring practice, where would your eyes go based on what you've heard from coaches and players so far?
Line of scrimmage, because we hear a lot. I mean, Noreen Willie yesterday was talking about they're running the ball different this year. They're coming off the ball different. Are you? Or are you? or are you playing against a bunch of dudes on the defensive line who haven't played on the defensive line? That's where I would go. And I don't, if someone's pushing someone else, it's kind of hard to tell who's good and who's bad. I'm not a trained line coach, but that's what I would be watching, just because, as Sam said, this is a team. Scott Frost and Mark Whipple both value the run game to an extreme degree, and it's a lot of what they want to do in the pass game is going to be built off the run game. So you're watching the line of scrimmage on offense to see if they can, if what they're doing there is transferable to the Big Ten. You're watching the defensive line to other guys out there, like you're saying, are there 3, 4, 5, 6 guys that are serviceable in that rotation? That's where I'd be watching.
I think Jimmy's answer is great, and so I'll add a second answer to it. I still would love to see how the quarterbacks are making decisions. I'd still love to see, where Thompson's setting up in the pocket, where he's distributing, how fast he gets off one. By one, I mean a primary read. I'm not trying to act like a coach. How quickly he progresses through the reads, how good the routes are. Because I think some of it is their passing game has to work better. And it's not that they weren't able to throw for some chunk plays. We all saw that. But so often they were pistol, play action, roll out, stop, throw, 28 yards down the field. You can't replicate that in the red zone. That's not a replicatable play. It just isn't. And, so they've got to find a way, I think, to be able to catch the snap, drop back, hit the back foot, throw the football. And just do it again and again and again and be good at it. And that means being able to hit precision routes, and your quarterback's got to be really good with his reads. And I just don't feel like that was their identity over the last 4 years. I think Tanner Lee was okay. He threw a lot of picks. I don't think it's been their identity for a while. I think Taylor Martinez was better at it in some ways than any of the quarterbacks they've had recently. So I'd love to see Casey Thompson be able to let's just operate a 2-minute drill where we're comfortable throwing a 7-yard out and we get out of bounds. And we're not holding the ball for 7 seconds looking for a 28-yard post. Can you just run a 2-minute drill where you gain 25 yards in 23 seconds and you got first and 10 at the opponent 47 and then you take a chunk? That's what I'm saying. I'd love to see that in a 2-minute drill.
Yeah, I like both of those answers. Mine, I guess I'll go with the skill guys. Just what does, we've heard good things about the running back room, but we haven't seen what Anthony Grant can do. We haven't seen what a slimmed down Jaquez Yant looks like. We haven't seen a ton of Ramir since he's come back from his injury, what that looks like. Obviously, this fall we'll get a chance to see A.J. Allen when he comes in, and maybe he has a chance to play as a freshman. But that running back room is interesting. I think you can learn a lot by just seeing, what kind of shake and bake do these guys have? How can they cut? What's their vision like? What's their short kind of quickness through the blockers? Do they follow their blocks? Like all that stuff that you don't really hear or learn about in interviews that you just have to kind of see. That's curious to me. And the receiving group too. I mean, we talked about it some, but what's that next step for Omar Manning as sort of the resident veteran at this point? How quickly can transfers like Isaiah Garcia Castaneda and Trey Palmer blend with Casey Thompson and those other quarterbacks? Because there's a rapport there that needs to happen along with learning a system and all that other stuff. And so I think seeing how those skill guys integrate and what they can bring individually to an offense that just wasn't very good inside the red zone in the past few years is curious to me. Should we turn to hoops for a bit?
Let's.
All right, men's basketball. Jimmy, my goodness, there's been a lot. You were with Creighton. You were embedded with Creighton last weekend.
I was.
It's not war. I'm sorry. You were with Creighton last weekend. Mm-hmm. You watched a winning basketball team.
I did.
With only 6 guys in that final game. It was pretty cool. Okay, so you're back to Nebraska. Busy 3 couple of days there. So Sam Griesel joins the program. You've talked to Sam. You haven't written the story up, but he joins the program.
It just hasn't run yet.
Right. Sam joins the program. Bryce declares for the NBA in a way that indicates he's probably not coming back.
Yeah.
Eduardo Andre, Trevor Lakes leave.
Keon Edwards
leaves, and Blaze Keita affirms his commitment to Nebraska, which is a big deal. Mm-hmm. I want to start with the addition. What do you think of him as a player? I don't know if you had a chance to watch any of his stuff, and what did he say to you?
Well, okay, for what Sam said is sort of a breath of fresh air that I don't think Nebraska's had in their basketball program, which is that this kid grew up like loving Nebraska basketball. He was rattling off names like Tony McRae. He was talking about how Tony McRae dapped him up once at a basketball camp, and he was it just made his life. Tony McRae's his favorite player still today because of that. And Cookie Miller, Lance Jeter. I think he said those guys were like superheroes to him. So like this is a guy who, when we had last year, one of the lead
Cookie Miller was a superhero to him. Not Cookie Belcher. Cookie Miller.
Last year, the 2 lead ball handlers for Nebraska,
he is.
Alonzo Verge and Bryce McGowens, wore the Huskers jersey because they wanted to go to the NBA. They saw Nebraska as a vehicle to get to the next step. And this is obviously that's part of Sam's decision here too. He was considering playing overseas, and then Hoiberg called him and he you know what? This guy's got NBA connections. We'll see what I can do. Sam Griesel, when he wears the script Huskers, that he bleeds that exact same shade of red. So that's the first thing, and that's important because I think that these guys haven't necessarily been around someone like that, and that can have an impact. Like right. There's a different pride that Sam Griesel will take playing for this team and I'm not saying the other guys didn't have pride, but it's different when you're from the place and you grew up watching them and you want so badly to win, not because that's your team, but it's been your team. This is like your introduction to basketball, right? So that's the first thing. As a player, he's got the size for the Big Ten. A guy that's 6'6", 215 as your primary ball handler. It's just there are passing angles that Sam can see that Alonzo Verge couldn't see just by virtue of Sam 6'6". Alonzo Verge is listed at 6'3". I'm not sure he's actually 6'3". That's a huge advantage. I think the flashpoint for Sam is going to be what he can do as a jump shooter. His free throw percentage and his 3-point percentage improved every single year at North Dakota State, to the point where last year he was shooting about 37% from three on like 2 attempts per game, which is not a lot, but he got there as like a sub 30% shooter. It's a huge improvement. He got there as like a 60% free throw shooter. He left as like a 75% free throw shooter. To close last year, he shot like an 8-game stretch where he shot 55% from three. All that stuff is trending upward. That's good. Defenses in the Big Ten are bigger and stronger. Defenses in the Big Ten, like he's not going to, in the Summit League, when you are 6'6", 215 and you're the primary ball handler, you can just move dudes out of the way because you're that big and they're not usually. Right. The kids who play at those schools tend to be smaller. Those are where the undersized guys go. Not going to be the case in the Big Ten. So you won't be able to rely on your size as much. Still an advantage because 6'6" is still big even for the Big Ten, but not going to be able to rely on that as much, so your jump shot becomes more important, and just need to see that a little bit of a higher volume. Like it would be good for him to get to maybe 3 or 4 3-point attempts a game instead of 2, to show more of that. Because what I think will start, Big Ten teams will from the start probably go under screens against him and encourage him to shoot those jump shots. And if you don't make them, well, that's how they're going to defend you forever, and it's going to be hard for you to get inside, what you need to do to spread the ball around. You need to beat somebody for the Fred Hoiberg machine to look like it needs to look. You need to gain an advantage in some way. You can post them up. Maybe that's the way you do it, but I think the jump shot is important. What else did you ask me about, Sam?
So he joins the team. People in their mind think, well, he's a replacement for Bryce.
He's the replacement for Alonzo Verge.
Yeah, I don't think he's a replacement for Bryce. I'm not, and this will sound, I want this to sound the right way. I'm not sure that they need a replacement for Bryce. And the reason I'm not sure is because Bryce McGowan's is kind of a one-off. In other words, like it's not that he didn't function within the offense, but there were many, many possessions in a given game where Bryce just got the ball and then he was the offense, or he wasn't. But it wasn't like he's coming off a screen, or a lot of it was Bryce is going to get the ball and he's going to do something.
Right. Give Bryce the ball, then set a screen for him.
I'm not sure that that's easy to replace unless you get a player who's as gifted at the NBA level as Bryce can be. And you might be able to find a player who helps your offense in ways that Bryce could not. And that's not to disparage him, but to say there were times when it was almost like, here's the offense, and then here's Bryce. Yeah. He was like a subplot to the movie, a separate subplot. And it was fine, and it works sometimes, but, their best win of the year, he didn't play. Yeah. And I think that's probably coincidental, but probably not entirely coincidental, because everybody before the game thought, oh, they're screwed. No, they won the game.
Right.
Without him.
Right. And it's,
they looked fine without him.
Right. There was already, I'll put it this way, there was already one guy on that team who could hijack an offensive possession. We know Alonzo Verge had issues with that. He sat on the bench a couple second halves because of it. Having 2 is tricky. It's if you have 2 guys, and Bryce is a guy who you do want to do that sometimes, because you do need someone on the court that can, if there's 7 on the shot clock and whatever you're running hasn't worked, you need a guy that said, okay, we tried, here you go do it. But yeah, it's that adds to the challenge. I'll say this: I think you're right, Sam, that you don't need another guy with Bryce's exact skill set. You don't need an ISO heavy guy. You don't need a guy who is gonna be taking a bunch of pull up threes, and they're gonna encourage that because he's shooting, even though he's shooting 27%. You don't need.
They encouraged that because that was Bryce part of his developmental track,
right? And it was tricky.
Other guys would have been pulled from the game from doing it.
And I think Bryce was tricky because, as I said all year, Bryce's experience at Nebraska, and we'll find out what he thought of it in the coming months, weeks, whatever, is going to color a lot of their success in that similar recruiting range going forward, I think. And I still believe that. So I think there was probably a carefulness with critiquing him and discouraging him from taking those shots that maybe there wasn't with other guys. But the other hand is, he did score 17 points a game. I think it's 16.8 is the exact figure. Somebody needs to fill it. Maybe it doesn't have to be a transfer portal guy. I think they're going to go grab another one. But, can C.J. Wilcher make a big scoring jump? If maybe that's your answer. But they do need to replace Bryce in that he's a big-time scorer. And they don't have a ready-made big-time scorer.
But their shots would go to someone.
Sure,
the shots,
they would.
The shots are the shots.
They will.
And some of them would be made by someone else. It's not like all 14 of his shots would be unmade.
They had, after Bryce and Alonzo last year, they were hurting for shot creation, particularly shot creation for other players. Kobe Webster could create a shot for himself. Just, it was oftentimes a herky-jerky dribble, and I'm going to pull up and shoot a mid-range or a deep three, that kind of thing. So they do need someone else who can. I think Sam is someone who has that kind of skill set, can get shots for himself and others. They need another guy. Like C.J. Wilcher can, if you take half of Bryce's shots and give them to C.J. Wilcher, you're going to make up the points just fine. C.J.'s not that kind of creator, though.
They have one assistant coach vacancy with Matt Abdelmassih being fired. They have another personnel department vacancy with Doc Sadler's position being eliminated. And they may have another assistant coach vacancy with Armand Gates' brother, Dennis, getting the head coaching job at Missouri.
Mm-hmm. Armand had a spot reserved for him at Dennis's introductory press conference.
Oh, there you go.
So
it's possible that he'll be moving on. What does Nebraska need to do? What could the picture look like? And if you got names, let's hear names.
Names are hard at this point in the game. I don't know if I have enough intel, or I think there's still some coaching carousel stuff that needs to shake out if we start getting names. I'll give you templates. First things first, you need somebody to fill the. I presume they want someone to fill the Matt Abdelmassih role, because Hoiberg does not have the same passion for recruiting that he does for X's and O's. I think he would be the first to tell you that. So he needs someone to help with that. Hoiberg, I think he likes evaluating talent. He does not like he doesn't like grassroots in it. He doesn't like flying around to all these junior colleges and these shaky gyms and watching for someone who may or may not be someone that you're interested in, right? So you need someone to fill that role. And you want someone with strong connections to the area, ideally. You want someone who maybe has more of a track record of building rosters from the ground up. I think it sounds like, reading between the lines of what Trev Alberts wants this program to look like, he wants 4-year players. I think it is fair to guess. So maybe someone, you can't go without the transfer portal, but one of the things that I thought was interesting from my week in Creighton was that someone asked McDermott about blending. They got transfers like Ryan Hawkins and Alex O'Connell into a culture that he was trying to build with these 4-year guys.
Northwest Missouri State and Duke.
Right.
Couldn't get more
and
different.
He said he made the exact same analogy that Matt Abdelmassih always makes. It's like, it's kind of like NBA free agency. But McDermott sees it as, free agents are the cherry on top. The ice cream, the hot fudge, all the stuff that goes underneath, those are your grassroots 4-year guys. So, and I think he said the kicker that got it, and this was a tweet that I sent out that a bunch of Nebraska, I think one guy even quote tweeted and added Fred Hoiberg in this tweet, was you need the right transfers. It's not just, you can't just go out there and grab it. You have to make sure that these guys, you have to know what's inside them. You have to do
your grocery
You have to do your homework. You have to see, what does this guy care about? Does he care about using this as a platform to something else, or is he invested in us? Does he want to win above all else? So that is there's a lot that goes into that. It's hard to know what's in people's hearts, but you have to find someone who is adept enough at discerning those kinds of things about people that you can do that with the transfer guys.
Dare I say that the way that I would describe it, and I'm not trying to step on your whatever here, I would say that Hoiberg and Abdelmassih recruited traits.
Mm-hmm.
When Greg McDermott got Ryan Hawkins, he recruited a basketball player. And Ryan Hawkins turned out to be a decent enough three-point shooter. But you look at the difference between Trevor Lakes and Ryan Hawkins. And the difference is Ryan Hawkins was a basketball player. Trevor Lakes was a three-point shooter. And he couldn't do the thing that they asked him to do. Casey is a three-point shooter. So when you recruit a skill, that skill has to hit. In my opinion, C.J. Wilcher was recruited for a skill. Now, he may develop into a more complete player and seems to be doing that. Mm-hmm. But it felt like, to me, too often, too many players on that floor were recruited for a specific skill, whereas Derek Walker was recruited because he's a good basketball player, and he's a complete player. Mm-hmm. And Trey's a complete player. You got to get more often. You just got to get good basketball players. Greg McDermott had Denzel Mahoney and Damian Jefferson on his Sweet 16 team. And where did Denzel come from? Southeast Missouri State.
Yeah.
And Damian Jefferson came from New Mexico. He followed Rencher up. But those are, let's be honest. Those two players right there were crucial to their journey to the Sweet 16, and they did not come from big ticket places. Ryan Hawkins comes from Northwest Missouri. Alex O'Connell came from Duke. He was not the most important player on that team this year, but he did play pretty big in big games. And so it feels like to me, with Griesel's addition, they're recruiting a basketball player, a guy that can do a bunch of things. And it's not about, are you going to be the person who's standing over there in the corner waiting for a pass from Verge or Bryce or Trey? We'll see. Do you think Trey's going to come back?
I would lean no.
Okay.
I would lean no. I think that Trey was speaking the whole preseason as if he wasn't going to come back, and without Bryce there, there's not. The only reason I give hesitation is like, what else is he going to do? I don't think Trey is ready. I think Trey sees himself as an eventual NBA player. I don't think he's ready for that yet. So I don't would he really hit the portal again, wait another year? That doesn't make any sense to me. So that's the hesitation.
I think he was a better
there.
player this year playing alongside his brother even when he was healthy. I don't.
Well, you could also argue that he was never actually healthy. And at the end there, you saw a couple glimpses when they went on that winning streak. I mean, I think this was a little bit overblown, but the way that Fred basically came out and said during one of the last press conferences and just pointed at Trey when we were asking what's going on here. This guy's made all the difference in the world. His defensive intensity was contagious. He's got bite to him. Not a lot of guys on that team have bite to him, so that he made a lot of difference. I think they should want him back. Absolutely.
I would be interested to see what it would look like for him to play with Bryce is coming next year or Bryce is here and not on the table.
Yeah.
Because if Bryce McGowan leaves and he goes to the NBA, then Trey's not playing for his brother anymore. He's not playing to set the table for his brother. Mm-hmm. He's not playing in anticipation of his brother getting there. He's not playing with his brother. He's just playing for Nebraska. I would be curious to see what that would look like, because I think Trey was a really good older brother, and I think a lot of times he wanted the best for his younger brother, and did. I think he played that way, and I think he was unselfish in that way. I think there were times when, there's things he could have done differently, even late in the season when he was attacking the basket, the last possession of the season notwithstanding. I would be curious to see what it would look like for him to play just for him, and just for Nebraska, and just for him, and just to put himself in position. The overseas thing is tricky because if you're going to go overseas, typically you're going overseas. You're not going overseas and then coming back. Right. And the overseas teams don't really like that. They want you to play.
Right.
You kind of stay over there, and so it's not for everybody.
Similar to Zavier Betts, Trey's a hard kind of player to replace. He's the kind of guy that you can just put on a Johnny Davis and say, we don't have to worry about Johnny Davis because Trey McGowan is on him. Right. That is very hard to replicate. So Nebraska should definitely want Trey back. I don't know that they'll get him back. The other thing that I think they need to do with their coaching vacancies, potential coaching vacancies, a defensive expert, which they had with Doc Sadler, but then his role on defense was limited because they brought in Nate Lenzer and made Doc a special assistant, and the rules changed for special assistants because you're not technically an on-court coach. So it was very convoluted at the beginning. I'll describe that role on this past year's team with this anecdote. At the beginning of the year, when I was doing a bunch of season preview stuff and I wanted to talk to Doc specifically about the defense, I was allowed to do that, and Doc talked defensive strategy with me, and it was part of the coach's preview, everything like that. When the defense was going south, and I asked during the middle of the season if I could talk to Doc about the defense, they said Doc is not in charge of defense here anymore. So it's a weird middle ground that they existed in with the defensive coordinator. We know that Fred is an offensive-minded coach. Basketball is basketball on a certain point. If Fred wanted to head up the defense, he could head up the defense. If Armon Gates wanted to stay and head up the defense, he could head up the defense. If Nate Lenzer wanted to head up the defense, he could head up the defense. But somebody, I think that needs to be a defined role on that team. Defensive coordinator, like people in the NBA use that term all the time. If Fred's running his staff like an NBA team, I would expect there to be a defensive coordinator next year.
I could see that.
Well, as the men's team comes to an end on one end of the spectrum, the women's team comes in quite on the other end. They make the NCAA tournament. They were an 8 seed. They lose to Gonzaga, 68-55. Finished the season 24-9. Sam, you covered the ladies most of the year. I don't know. Does the way that they finish do their season justice? And is this the end or the beginning for what they're doing under Amy Williams?
They'd love for it to be the beginning, and they have potential for it to be the beginning. They went 24-9. They went to the first round of the NCAA tournament, first NCAA tournament since 2018. They didn't win against Gonzaga. I picked Nebraska to win by 1, which should have been a tell to people that I didn't think they were going to win. But one of the challenges that I knew that they were going to have with Gonzaga is I think Gonzaga, honestly, is just a little bit more athletic. They're a little quicker. And I think they were a little bit, their elbows were out a little bit more, and they were a little tougher. And quick and tough in the NCAA tournament wins games, especially if you can hit threes. And Gonzaga didn't hit a bunch of them, but I knew it was going to be a hard game. I think Nebraska's three-point shooting was a little bit of a mirage after Ashley Scoggin was removed from the team. It became hard for them to hit three-pointers at times. And even though they hit 8, I think, or 9 against Gonzaga, they couldn't get anything at the rim. And if there's been an ongoing problem with Nebraska women's basketball, to be very honest with you, since Rachel Terrio left, or maybe Natalie Romeo, one of the two, they were both on the same team, they have a hard time getting to the rim consistently and making plays at the rim. And so in women's basketball, you want players who can get around the corner, and it's easier to do so. You want an Alonzo Verge. And they had one in Sam Hybe. She was able to get to the rim. You need more players who can do that, who can just get all the way there. And once you have players that can get down Broadway, then all of a sudden all the other stuff becomes way, way, way easier. And they only had one, and they need 2 or 3. They're going to have Jazz Shelley, who is a terrific player on so many levels, become more aggressive at the rim and learn how to finish there. They've had 3 players leave, Ruby Porter, Bella Cravens, and Michael Caton. They're going to have to figure that out. They have 2 more guards who have been basically on injury reserve for 2 years. Are those 2 players going to play, or are they going to leave? So they're going to be in the transfer portal. The returners are Alexis Markowski, who I think is going to be a really gifted post. Isabel Bourne, who's about as good as she's going to be, but is pretty good, I think, for the collegiate level. Jazz Shelley still has another level she can get to as a player, and that is to score right at the cup. Sam Hybe needs to decide whether she wants to come back or not. She's kind of like their Trey McGowan's, and she's better, honestly. And I think she'll come back. And then, we'll see. They're going to have options in the transfer portal. This is true about Nebraska athletics, whether it's football or some other sport. This part is portable. Nebraska will do better in the transfer portal than people think. And one of the reasons they will do well in the transfer portal is because Nebraska is a good landing spot for kids, for players who did not have the best experience the first time around. The culture at Nebraska is relatively player forward. I think you would say that's true of Fred. The players don't think that they're beaten down by Fred. I think the players who play for Amy Williams would say the same thing. I think the players who play for Scott Frost would say the same thing. Mm-hmm. I don't think they think they're being abused or being browbeaten or humiliated on the field.
If anything, the criticism with Fred this year is there's too much freedom, right?
Right. So, but that's a plus. I mean, I think that gets kids in the door, and they're like, oh, man, these people seem pretty good. And then the other piece they give you is, hey, if you haven't graduated, we'll get you out of here in 3 semesters. We'll take care of you. We know how to do this. We've got a good academic support system. We'll get you your degree. By the way, it's a Big Ten degree. By the way, you're going to make NIL money. By the way, you're kind of a local celebrity. What's not to like except the winning? Oh, by the way, the Nebraska women won. So, I think it'll be fine for them. I think they'll be able to get some transfers, kind of like the volleyball team, maybe not quite as good of players, but close to that. A name to watch is Asia Blackwell, who is a player that just came out of Missouri. She's guard, technically. She's a 6-foot guard who was averaged a double-double in the SEC. And she was at Missouri. So that would be a name to watch. I don't know that they'll get her. I think she could end up going to Baylor or somewhere really good. But Nebraska will probably have a chance there if they want to pursue her. I'd watch some other players too. They will get a couple of transfer guards. I'm confident of that. And then their incoming recruiting class is small, but one of those players is the 6'6" center who's going to play volleyball, and that's Maggie Mendelson. She'll be the highest rated post they've had since Jess Shepard. She won't come with some of the issues that Jess did, of like just not really necessarily wanting to play in state, not enjoying. Maggie will come here fresh, and it won't be, I've been to 500 games like Jess had, and she's 6'6", and a 6'6" center who's also the nation's best middle blocker probably can block the basketball. So defensively, they're going to get better at the rim. They're going to get a lot better at the rim. And they weren't great there, and they'll get a lot better because Maggie's there. Now, she won't join the team, I would assume, until after the volleyball season's over, because if I had to play a hunch, I suspect she's going to be one of their top 3 middle blockers, along with Caitlin Horde, and help me out. She's looking for a 7th year.
Who's been
Kayla Caffey.
Kayla Caffey.
If Kayla Caffey comes back, then I think Maggie's probably the 3rd middle blocker. But she's going to be a major factor. She's slightly better in volleyball than she is in basketball, but she is the functional equivalent, and this name will not resonate with either one of you, but it will for some of our listeners, of Jennifer Hamson, who was an All-American volleyball and basketball player for BYU back in the mid 2014, 2015. So Hamson, this is the comparison piece. Jennifer Hamson, I think, was an outside hitter for BYU. Mendelson will be a middle blocker, but this is the comparison. Maggie has the chance to be a double player with some ease, who can block 3 or 4 shots a game. Like, that's what they could get if she's healthy coming off of volleyball.
I wonder where you put some of these factoids in your brain. I really do.
I don't either.
Real quick, I forgot to mention when we were talking Nebraska basketball, the other piece of news this week was that they secured a commitment, or reaffirmed a commitment, from Blaze Keita,
let's talk about
the top junior college big man player in the country, who is, when you listened to Trev Alberts on the radio a couple weeks ago after when he announced Hoiberg's contract extension, he kind of outlined what Nebraska hasn't been doing and needs to do to win the Big Ten, which is toughness, defense, rebounding. Well, Blaze Keita is like he's the emblematic player of that mindset shift. He is an old school. Now he's got an 18-foot jump shot, and Fred believes that eventually that can become a 3-point shot with some work. But for the most part, as Sam shakes his head at me, for the most part, Blaze Keita is an old school center. He is a guy who at Coffeyville they just throw the ball in the post to, and he just does a couple shoulder shimmies and does a drop step and scores over guys. And that's not the Jayhawk League, which is the league that he plays in, is not like, there are some situations where he can overpower people, but there are also 2 Division I prospects in that conference, and I think he's played 2 games against those guys last year, and he averaged like 20 points a game in those 2 games. So legit dude, 6'11", 230, and I have a massive story running on Blaze, 2 stories actually running on Blaze this weekend. One is about his journey, which started in Mali, Africa, then he went to a camp in Mali where he was so raw that they weren't sure whether they should move him on to the next step in this process, which was connect him with the national team and put him on the radars of some high school coaches, just because I think he'd only been playing basketball for a year. He'd been playing soccer most of his life. But they just loved how hard this guy was playing in these camps that they said they took place in the summer, and they said it was 100 degrees outside, and they did this. These camps ran all day with the exception of a 2-hour lunch break, and they made sure the players were always moving because they wanted to make sure that they knew how to play through fatigue. That was one of the goals of the camp. And while a lot of the other guys faded, Blaze, even though he was dropping passes and messing up the footwork and all that stuff, chased after every loose ball, and if there was a turnover, the big guy's usually the last guy on a fast break who can catch the guy. Didn't matter, he sprinted after him every time. He tried to block every dunk. I think the exact quote is, they bet on his heart. So this is the kind of guy that Nebraska wants in their program. He's developed his skill set, his footwork has come so far. His English, which was another concern. They weren't sure that they were going to be able to teach him English because he spoke more Bambara, which is the native language in Mali, than French. And they weren't sure they would be able to translate that as well to English. So all these conflating factors. They weren't sure, but they bet on him because the dude just played really hard, and now he has matched that intensity with a better skill set and a better understanding of basketball. His coaches at Coffeyville say, if you just show him something, show it to him 2 or 3 times, he'll just get it. He'll go in there and do it immediately, and he's their best defensive communicator. All these things that Fred Hoiberg has needed and Nebraska has needed to win in the Big Ten over the last few years. He's coming in, I think he's already 21 or 22 years old, so he's mature enough. He's got 3 years of eligibility. He'll be one of the older guys on the court immediately for Nebraska. He'll have, if it goes well, he'll be around until he's 24, 25. That kind of presence is very valuable. He'll have the Derek Walker type presence for this team, and he's a fun kid. Like he's a bubbly, smiley, grateful for where he's at type of person. So reading about all that and a ton more this weekend
story,
on Blaze
Jimmy.
Keita.
Really
That's coming
is.
this weekend.
It's really something. First, they need this player, and that's helpful. That he's gonna. I think he's probably gonna be a good player for them.
I don't know that he'll be the kind of offensive force for Nebraska. I don't know if that Nebraska's ever gonna be dumping the ball to him on a consistent basis. He can still develop a lot. I don't know if he'll be that kind of player, but he'll definitely help them in rebounding immediately, help them with rim protection immediately, and
Glue guy.
he'll move. He moves up the floor pretty well for his size. Checks a lot of boxes, and by the way, he won't care if he's not touching the ball at the same rate that he is at Coffeyville. That's the sense I get.
There's going to be less distress if he's down there low. There'll be less distress surrounding whether he can defend a Big Ten post. Not Kofi Coburn, because Kofi's graduated. But let's say Hunter Dickinson comes back. There'll be less distress about whether they can single cover Hunter Dickinson, because Blaze Keita will be down there for however many possessions. Now, he may foul out, but that's a guy that you can use, and that's helpful. Like, you don't necessarily have to dedicate 2 players to it, and that helps your overall defensive structure. It's a great story, and I think people will really enjoy reading it. He's a huge part of this team next year. And Nebraska has a unique relationship with big men over the years, and that a lot of them don't pan out. We could do a book about all the ones who...
We've done this during pregame meals at the media table. Derek Walker, the best Nebraska big man since.
Alex Marich? Alex Marich always holds a special place in my heart.
Well, he's better than Derek Walker. So, yes. At least since him. Go ahead.
Him and Kamani Friend. Those are the guys that always come back to me. But you're going back 15, 20 years.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and Derek Walker has made the most of what Derek Walker was given, but Derek Walker is not a world beater. So that is the situation that they're dealing with. And then, by the way, if Derek Walker comes back, now you have 2 serviceable big men, which they haven't had. So,
I mean, can you just imagine, like, all the names over the years that you have to start cycling through there?
Oh, yeah.
The most what's the most famous one? I already know the one that I would pick as the most famous of all.
What do you got?
Shung Ping.
Ping, yeah.
So Shung Ping is one.
Almeida, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was
Yeah,
something.
I think Jorge Brian Diaz was probably as good as Walker. He was okay.
Yeah, all right, sure.
So Jorge Brian Diaz, Andre Almeida. I'm just trying to think if there was anybody. Leslie Smith was good for that 1 year.
Sure, yeah.
Moses Abraham.
It's been a while since a post was
Dubio
the face of
KK.
the team. Yeah.
I mean, these aren't players that are good, but I'm just remembering all the centers that they've had. Yeah. I mean, Shung Ping really stands out. Remember Alex Chapman, who never actually played here?
Yeah.
He was from Sheridan Junior College. Remember him? Christopher whatever from Germany. Didn't really play. Not Stan Hardinger, but Christian something, who played for Doc, and he didn't play. They were going to get Vander Joachim, who was a really good player for Hawaii, but then Walter Rose left, and then Doc got fired, and then Vander decided to go to Hawaii, and he was good there.
You're right. It would be a book. I don't know how
I
many
mean,
people would
it's
buy
really
it, but it would be a book.
When you start going through it, like Kamani Friend is one of the best
I love
5
Kamani
big men in
Friend.
the last 25 years for
he was
Nebraska
great.
basketball. And Kamani was pretty good.
He was good. Long reach, rim protection.
Amani friend.
This sounds like a project that Dirk would absolutely
I think it might be. Yeah, it might
sink
be
his
him.
teeth into.
It might be you.
He would
I
love
don't
it.
know.
He would
would
vibe on
love it.
that.
Like if you start going all the way back, Leaf Nelson. You probably don't remember Leaf Nelson.
Not really.
Vincent
no.
Hamilton was a great big man.
Yeah, Hamilton
big,
was good.
Big
yep.
10, Big 12 Player of the Year. Mikey Moore. So they had great big men in the. When Jimmy Williams was the assistant coach at Nebraska, they had great big men, right? So Rich King, Mikey Moore, Derek Chandler, Vincent Hamilton, Tony Farmer,
Yep.
Gregory. They had great ones. Oh, again and again and again because you knew how to recruit them. And then Williams was fired along with Nee, and they've never quite gotten the same, with the exception of Alex Marich, who was recruited by
Doc Sadler. Well,
No.
he recruited him back.
He re-recruited him. Scott Spinelli was the
He
guy
was
that
the
recruited
initial,
him the
yeah,
first time
right.
under Barry Collier.
Doc flew to Australia to bring him back when he took the job.
That's right. So Doc did re-recruit him, but Doc himself didn't get a lot of great big men in his time.
No, he did not.
He really struggled. That's when Sheng Ping was one of them. And then under Tim Miles, remember the first one? Sergei Vucetic.
I couldn't have pronounced that, but yeah.
It was, yeah. And then, Ivan Wadrago was not bad.
He's okay.
For as far as Nebraska big men go.
In a relatively
Eduardo
speaking,
Andre.
yes,
Eduardo
that's true.
Andre.
And here we are.
Best wishes.
Derek Walker probably is the best one since Alec Marich.
Best wishes to Eduardo Andre,
Oof.
wherever he's going.
Why didn't it work with him? He's got skills.
He's got great athletic traits, and that I think
Maybe he doesn't have skills.
he shows flashes. It's every time you ask Fred Hoiberg a question about Eduardo Andre, so we're just waiting for Eduardo to keep it simple, which in basketball coach speak means please stop turning the ball over, stop trying to play a role that you are not. And Eduardo Andre had the highest turnover rate on the team, 29.6%. Basically, every third time that Eduardo Andre finished a possession, it was a turnover. So that's why it didn't work. Eduardo
Keon
Andre,
Edwards just wasn't good enough. Or
weird college arc already. 2 years into it.
tough. You feel for him, don't you?
Quick Keon, I do. Quick Keon Edwards retread here. Keon Edwards, a consensus top 100 recruit in the class of 2021. He was supposed to be in Bryce's class. He reclassifies in part to take advantage of this COVID year. So it's a free year. Why not take it, right? Goes to DePaul, plays 5 games. Didn't work out. Let's transfer. Comes to Nebraska. He was in my mind, one of the stars of opening night. Casey's hitting 30-foot threes. Keon Edwards is throwing down windmills and hit a couple of threes himself. I'm thinking, all right, this is something here. He's 6'7", After Trey goes down, he's in the starting lineup. His size, his athleticism, he can maybe replicate. Obviously, no one can replicate Trey's defense, but maybe that's the guy you turn to, and he was a ghost out there. He was a ghost. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the famous Tony Snell stat line, where Tony Snell in one random game a couple years ago, who's a forward for, I don't even know who Tony Snell plays for anymore, but he's in the NBA. He played like 30 minutes, zeros across the board. 0 points, fouls, free throws, whatever. He didn't do anything.
Wow.
It's kind of what Keon Edwards was doing out there, doing those 5 starts. No disrespect. That's what happened.
A minute
So,
eater.
All right.
I don't know what,
Shall we go into the weekend?
top
with
100 prospect.
I know it's tough.
It's
man.
crazy.
It's tough.
Again,
You
best
feel for
wishes.
him.
Best wishes to
He
wherever
should not
he's
have
going.
enrolled early.
Maybe he shouldn't have. I don't know.
Maybe. I don't think that COVID early enrollee thing was a good idea for anybody. Let's go enroll at a college in the middle of a pandemic.
We'll see what happens next.
I don't think it suited the player who did it for Nebraska's women's team either. She's a terrific talent, but I think it was hard to come in during COVID. But you already know my take on early enrollment. I wouldn't do it. I would actively encourage my football players not to.
I think it depends on the position. If you're a quarterback and you want to get a head start, I think that makes more sense than if you're a lineman, who's trying to get into the strength program and not play still for 2 years. I think that depends. All right, well, let's go into the weekend on Nebraska big men and the famous lines of what ifs.
If people hung around
Terrific.
for Evan and Sam just trading Nebraska big men from the last 25
God
years,
bless them.
good for you guys. You guys are the diehards.
Thanks for listening, guys. Enjoy the weekend, and we will talk to you later.